There's this life support system we all rely on, but we hardly ever think about it. It's the environment. But what if I told you it provides services that are worth an absolutely astronomical amount of money every single year? Well, today we're going to try and put a price tag on nature.
Okay, so let's get right into it. When we use that word, the environment, what are we actually talking about? I mean, it's so much more than just, the trees and hills outside your window. It's this incredibly complex system that literally makes our existence possible.
And the word itself actually gives us a pretty big clue. It comes from this old French word, environ, which, well, it just means surrounding. Simple enough, right? But the real question is, what exactly is in that surrounding?
Well, our surroundings are basically a big mix of two different kinds of things. You've got the biotic stuff, that's everything living. Think plants, animals, tiny little microbes, all of it. And then you have the abiotic stuff. That's all the non-living things, like the air, the water, the soil, even sunlight. And here's the kicker. The real magic happens where these two sides meet and interact.
So if it's this huge interacting system, maybe the best way to think about it is like an engine, a really, really complex, self-sustaining engine. So the question is, how does this massive planetary engine actually run? Let's pop the hood and take a look.
Okay, so the whole system can pretty much be broken down into four big interconnected parts. You've got the atmosphere, that's all the air around us. The hydrosphere, that's all the water. The lithosphere, which is the solid ground, the land and rocks. And then the biosphere. That's all of life itself, and it's the part that really ties the other three together.
And wherever these spheres overlap and you find life thriving, that's what we call an ecosystem. This is really the fundamental building block of the environment. It's just a community of living things interacting with their physical, non-living surroundings. And they can be tiny, like a single pond, or absolutely massive, like the entire Amazon rainforest.
Now, the most important thing happening inside any ecosystem is the flow of energy. A simple food chain shows this perfectly, right? It all starts with the sun. That energy gets captured by a producer, let's say some grass. Then a primary consumer, like a grasshopper, comes along and eats the grass. A frog, a secondary consumer, eats the grasshopper. And then a snake eats the frog. See? It's a straight line, a simple transfer of energy from one thing to the next.
But of course, nature is almost never that simple, right? A snake doesn't just eat frogs, and frogs definitely eat more than just grasshoppers. In the real world, all these simple little chains are woven together into what we call a food web. And this complexity, it's absolutely crucial. Why? Because it makes the whole ecosystem way more stable and able to handle change.
Now, here's something that's kind of wild. This energy transfer, it's not very efficient. At all. There's something called the 10% rule, which basically says that at each step up the food web, about 90% of the energy is lost. Poof, gone, mostly as heat. So think about it. Only about 10% of the energy from the grass actually makes it into the grasshopper, and then only 10% of that energy makes it to the frog. This has huge, huge implications. It's exactly why it takes so much more land and resources to produce, say, a pound of beef than it does a pound of beans.
Okay, so we've established we have this massive, intricate engine, and it's running on this constant flow of energy. But what does it actually produce? I mean, what are the goods and services that this planetary engine gives to us, to humanity? And maybe more importantly, what are they worth?
Well, there's a name for these outputs. Scientists and economists call them ecosystem services. And really, that's just a fancy way of saying all the benefits we get from nature. I mean, think about it. Bees pollinating our crops for free, or coastal mangroves acting as a natural barrier against storm surges, saving, billions in potential damages. That's what we're talking about.
And these services usually get grouped into four main buckets. First, you have provisioning services. That's the actual stuff we get, like food and fresh water. Then there are regulating services, which are the benefits from natural processes, like, say, the climate being regulated or our air being purified. Third, you've got cultural services. These are the non-material things, like going for a hike or just the spiritual value of nature. And finally, you have supporting services. These are the big behind-the-scenes processes, like creating soil, that make everything else possible.
I know, this all sounds great, but it can also feel a little abstract. So let's get back to that direct question. If you had to put a price tag on all of this stuff, what would the grand total be?
Get ready for this. The most widely cited estimate puts the value at a mind-boggling 125 trillion US dollars. And let me be clear, that's not a one-time thing. That is the estimated value of what nature provides every single year. To put that in perspective, That is more than the entire global GDP. It's staggering.
And that right there perfectly illustrates the huge paradox in how we deal with the environment. Because nobody sends us a bill for clean air, right? Or for stable coastlines. So we act like they have no value. We just take these trillion-dollar services completely for granted, and because of that, we end up overusing and damaging them. But when you take a system like this for granted, it doesn't just keep running perfectly forever. Sooner or later, you start to see cracks appearing in that engine. So let's take a look at the major threats to this natural capital that we all depend on.
Now, there are a lot of threats, but they pretty much boil down to 5 major culprits. We're talking about habitat destruction, clearing land for farms or cities, widespread pollution, the big one, climate change, overexploitation, which is things like overfishing, and finally, introducing invasive species that just completely wreck local ecosystems.
Let's just zoom in on one of those for a second. Pollution. It's not just one thing. It attacks our environment from all sides. You've got air pollution from burning fossil fuels, causing all sorts of health problems. You have industrial waste and farm runoff getting into our water, making it unsafe. And then you have waste and pesticides seeping into the very soil we need to grow our food. It's a problem with a lot of different faces.
And then, looming over all of these other issues is climate change. You'll often hear it called a threat multiplier, and that's a perfect description. It basically takes all the other problems we just talked about, habitat loss, pollution, you name it, and it just cranks up the volume. It makes droughts worse, floods more intense, and it pushes ecosystems right to their breaking point.
But look, the story doesn't have to end there. And that's the crucial point. Just recognizing these problems is the absolute first step to finding solutions. None of this damage is inevitable. We, right now, get to decide how this next chapter is written.
And you know what? That next chapter, it starts with us, with each of us. It starts with being a more responsible consumer, really thinking about the environmental cost of the things we buy. It means actually practicing the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. It means saving water and energy where we can, and maybe, just maybe, the most important thing is using our voices to talk about this and push for change.
But look, our individual actions are just the start. They're the foundation. Where it gets really powerful is when they scale up. At the community level, that can mean local groups taking care of their forests or rivers. And at the government and even international level, it means we need strong laws, we need to set aside protected areas, and we need global agreements to tackle these huge problems that don't care about borders, like climate change.
And really, underneath all of this action, from the smallest personal choice to the biggest international treaty, there has to be a fundamental shift in how we think. We need to develop a new kind of environmental ethic, a moral framework that doesn't see us as separate from nature, but as a part of it, as its stewards, with a really deep responsibility to protect it, not just for us, but for all the generations that are going to come after us. And that brings us to the final question. And honestly, it might be the most important one of all. This incredibly intricate $125 trillion life support system, it's a legacy. We inherited it. So the critical question for every single one of us is this: what kind of system, and in what kind of shape, are we going to choose to leave behind?